Good evening and welcome to the University of Manitoba's Tuesdays with TD webinar, The Act of Balancing Spending and Saving. My name is Tracy Bowman. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations and a very proud University of Manitoba alum. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses and research spaces are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ininiwak, and Sinuak, Dakota Oyate, Dene, and Inuit, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. UM recognizes that the treaties signed on these lands are a lifelong enduring relationship, and we're dedicated to upholding their spirit and intent. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present. With this understanding, we commit to supporting Indigenous excellence through active reconciliation, meaningful change, and the creation of an environment where everyone can thrive. Our collaboration with Indigenous communities is grounded in respect and reciprocity, and this guides how we move forward as an institution. Well, thank you for joining us and making this event part of your evening. Tonight, we're going to be diving into finding that sweet spot between spending and saving, understanding your cash flow, paying down debt, creating a budget, prioritizing your short and long-term financial goals, and paying yourself first. So just a few housekeeping details before we get started. If you've participated in any of our virtual programming before, you know that we record the sessions, and we do that so we can share them with you afterwards, and we post them on our Tuesdays with TD YouTube channel, and we really encourage you to share them with friends and family as well, who might be interested in the topic. We have allocated an hour for the session, and we're going to do our very best to keep to that hour. We're going to include questions and answers as well in that 1 hour. And so I encourage you that throughout the session, if a question comes to mind, please jot it down or use either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions, and we will do our very best to ask them. We have a pretty good track record of being able to answer all the questions, so I really encourage you to do that, as we have a financial expert here for free to provide advice, so please do take advantage of that. Also, before we start, I want to say a huge thank you to TD Insurance, a University of Manitoba affinity partner, for their sponsorship and leadership of today's financial webinar. As you may know, TD Insurance provides discounted vehicle, home, and travel insurance to alumni, students, staff, and faculty, and direct investing opportunities through TD Wealth. And very soon, this spring, we'll be launching small business insurance that those of you who are entrepreneurs or know of entrepreneurs may want to take advantage of. And you can check out this and all the great benefits and perks on the umanitoba.ca/alumni website under the perks and benefits page. So now let's meet our presenter. I'd like to introduce you to Danica Rico, who is a senior financial planner with TD Wealth. She's been working in the financial services field for over 17 years, based here in Winnipeg, and she's often the presenter for our Tuesdays with TD series, and so she is probably a familiar face to those of you who are repeat attendees. So welcome, Danica, and with that, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tracy. So thank you guys all for joining us tonight to chat a bit about balancing your spending and your savings. And we call it the art of balancing savings and spending, because that is exactly what it is. It's a bit of an art. And so I have found over time that a lot of people will come to me and say, Danica, tell me how to do it. And like, what is the hard, fast rule? And there is no hard, fast rule. And people get excruciatingly frustrated with me because my answer generally comes with it depends. And it depends on you. It depends on your priorities. It depends on your lifestyle. It depends on what matters most to you. And so as we go through this presentation this evening, my intent is to give you some tools to help identify those things that matter most to you and be a bit more aware of the life choices that you make around saving and spending and managing your credit. But I'm also going to do my very hardest to leave a lot of time for questions at the end, because we have found, particularly with this series, that there's a lot of questions. And if you're thinking that question, somebody else is likely thinking that question. So have the courage to type that question, and we're going to do our best to answer that question. So I'm going to touch on some things, and this is not going to be all exhaustive, but hopefully it gets you starting to think about yourself, your needs, and making sure we're setting you up for success. And so we're going to start by talking a bit about cash flow, as Tracy mentioned. We're going to run into some budget conversations, talking about defining and prioritizing your goals. And sometimes that means something a little bit different than what you actually think it means. We're going to talk a little bit about credit. And this is a big hot topic. It came up quite a bit last time we did a budget conversation. And so understand that I've got a couple slides here, but you can certainly ask more questions and I'll do my best to answer. And paying yourself first is more of a reminder at the very end about making sure you're prioritizing yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you. So let's just jump right in and start talking about it. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about cash flow. And so when we think about cash flow, a lot of the time people will come and they will give me what they deem a budget. So if I ask somebody, hey, tell me what you spend every month, they will generally come up and do something like you see on the screen. And they're going to say, hey, Danica, my rent is $1,500 a month. My car loan's $150 bi-weekly. My groceries are $200 a week. I get paid $1,500 every 2 weeks. And I say, but you came to me because you were concerned about your spending. And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, but you said you don't have any money at the end of the month. And they say, well, yeah. And I said, but you just told me that you've got $559 left over at the end of the month based on what you just said your budget was. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so do you have $559? And they're like, no. And I go, okay, well, we need to understand this a little bit better and start talking a bit about your cash flow. So when I'm talking about cash flow, this is the money movement in and out of your bank account. That's a really important thing to understand. And the reality is that your expenses are not always going to match your pay cycle. So, if you're paid bi-weekly, which most of us are, we either have a semi-monthly or a bi-weekly pay period, you are going to have 2 months a year where you get 3 paychecks. If you get, let's say, $1,500 every 2 weeks, 10 months of the year, you're going to get $3,000. 2 months a year, you're going to get $4,500. And so what you can see in front of you is I'm saying you're making $3,250 a month, but actually that $250 is showing up in 2 payments throughout the course of the year. If you have monthly expenses, for example, you've got rent and then you've got $1,500 bi-weekly, a lot of the time, if we don't manage this appropriately, you're going to find that one paycheck feels really short and you have surplus at the other one. And so what I would like us to start thinking about is as our costs as a whole over the month, our expenses as a whole, versus trying to go paycheck to paycheck with your cash flow. Okay. So the first thing we need to do, if we really want to get into the weeds, is understand where your money goes. And this, a lot of the time, is where I lose people because we don't want to do the work. And unfortunately, this piece requires us to do the work and be honest with ourselves around where we spend our money. And so in an ideal world, in my ideal world, what you do is you print out or you look at or you put an Excel spreadsheet of 12 months of your spending. Because the reality is our spending is not the same monthly. We are going to have months where it's really expensive. People don't realize this. But if you're a Christian and you celebrate Christmas, it shows up every single year. And if you have a celebration that's not Christmas, that requires gifts, it shows up every single year. And yet somehow we're blustered in our budget and we can't get over that hump in December when our credit card is $4,000 and we don't have the money to cover it. And so understanding our ebbs and flows throughout the year is as important as understanding those fixed expenses that we have on a monthly basis. When we create budgets, a lot of us miss the mark because of that. And we also miss the mark because we don't think about the unexpected. If you have a car, it will break down at some point in your life. If you have a home, there will be a house repair that needs to be done at some point in your life. If we haven't allocated a portion of your budget to these unexpected expenses, you will never succeed in making sure that your budget is aligned because they're going to come up. And what are we going to rely on? Probably our credit cards or our line of credit to cover off those pieces. So I cannot stress enough the importance of understanding where our cash flow goes, both monthly and annually. And so you might be asking, okay, so that sounds like a lot of work. How do I even do this? Well, there is an old school way of doing this, and then there is a new school way of doing this. And I'm going to strongly encourage you to do the old school way. And the reason is that it is a reality check. If we take the time to itemize all of our expenses, it gives us an opportunity to have an aha moment in our spending habits that doesn't happen if you have an app that does it for you. I have been in this industry for many, many years. And at the very beginning of my career, I thought I was going to be a hero and I was going to save everybody from their budgets. And so I would sit down with somebody early on and they'd say, Danica, I don't know where my money's going. I'm in the red every month. It is hard. And I said, don't worry. We're going to get you on track. We're going to create a budget. It's going to be great. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay, give me 12 months of your bank statements. And I'm going to go through and itemize it all for you. We're going to figure out where it's going. And they say, fantastic. I say, great. We're going to book a meeting a week out so we can do this together. They're like, awesome. They come in, we sit down. I say, hey, you're spending $150 a month on Starbucks. They're like, yeah, that hurts. That's my $10 coffee a day. And I say, yeah. So what are we going to do? Like, is that something we can adjust? And they're like, yep, we can adjust that. And I say, great. And then we go through it. We decide what we're going to tweak together. And then they come back a month later. I say, so how did you do? And they go, didn't do it. Couldn't do it. I'm in the red again. And so what I realize is that if I do it, it doesn't give you the pause and the moment to say, hey, this is my spending and I now know what I'm doing. And so for you to take that time and go through those bank statements, to itemize your spending, to really dig deep, you are giving yourself the biggest gift of being self-aware to where you're spending your money. And that's going to be the first step in us getting through this and setting you up for success. So great. You pull your statements. Well, what am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to go through and itemize everything. Now you can do this. A lot of banks, you can download your transactions into an Excel spreadsheet or a Google document, and then you can start manipulating them a little bit, highlighting them, color coding them. You can print it out and highlight it, whatever is going to work for you. But what I would suggest that you do is you find your categories. So is it groceries? Is it gas? Where are the things that we want to tweak? Is it concert tickets? Do you spend a lot on clothes or makeup? Is it takeout food? And then what you do is you go through that and you average it out over a 12-month period so you can see where that money is going. When we're looking at cash flow, and this is a hard thing to think about, but your income is going to equal your expenses most of the time. This is really important. This is like accounting 101. And you're going to say, what, Danica? What? Your income has to equal your expenses. So if you're saving $300 a month, that is an expense in your category in front of you. Okay, so I've got $3,000 coming in. I've got money that goes to rent, money that goes to my car loans. If I have the capacity to save, it's an expense item right here in this spreadsheet. If you don't put it in there, they're not going to equal at the bottom. Now, the only time that this number is not going to be the same per month is if your spending is greater than your income coming in. So if you're spending more, if more is going towards your credit card, then that's coming in every month, maybe you're going to have a deficit. If you're saving money, then it's going to either be equal. And if it's not, it's because you're building a balance in your bank account, which ends up becoming a line item as an expense for savings. So if this is a hard concept to understand, try and hash it out a little bit. You can ask questions at the end, but it's really important to get this down so that we can finite understand where all of your money goes on a monthly basis. Now, if you're like, oh man, Danica, I don't like spreadsheets, I don't like numbers, I don't like bank statements, and you just can't commit, there is an app for it. And so you can do the new age approach. I'm just old school. I don't think the app is going to give you the aha moment, but if it does and it works for you, use it. And so when I say app, I have the TD My Spend app in front of you, but most institutions have some way of categorizing, summarizing your information and spending and presenting it back to you on their app. And if your bank doesn't do it, then there's a myriad of apps that you can find online to help you itemize and recognize your information. And so you can categorize them. You can upload or send in your bank information so that it'll analyze for you where you're spending money. In fact, a lot of those apps will give you the ability to track your budget, so what you're setting versus what you're spending on an ongoing basis. I just think that there's a big value in you understanding it yourself and doing it yourself at least that one time, manual paper to pen before you go new age. But if this is your thing, do it. There's an app for it. There's no reason we can't understand our spending. So once you understand where your money is going, this is the first step. We understand where our money is going. Now and only now can we start creating a budget. And so what we do is we look at all of that cash flow and we've itemized all of those things. We have to identify, is this a fixed expense? Can we adjust it easily, or is it pretty dead set? So rent, pretty hard to change unless we're moving. Car loan, unless we sell our car, it's going to continue on. Student loans, well, we got to pay for that education we got. Is it a variable expense? Does it change every month? Gas, groceries, car repairs. And discretionary expenses are non-essential expenses. Those are the things like our Starbucks or our Tim Hortons or our chapstick or our clothes that we really like. Now, one of the realities is that when most people create a budget, what they do is the easiest place for us to cut our spending is our discretionary expenses. And so most people will slash it right out. But if we don't put at least a little bit of a discretionary savings, you're essentially giving yourself a crash diet with no carbs. It's going to fail. Hands down, it is going to fail. You've got to set up a space for you to have discretionary savings so that you can enjoy your life. And so generally, what I suggest that we do is we reduce some of these, or we tweak them by incremental changes. And I'm going to show you on the next page how to do that. But we reduce something maybe by $10 a month. We get comfortable with it, and then we reduce it further over time. Starting small and building in good habits is going to be so much better for you than trying to cut everything all at once to create a radical change. It's just like losing weight. If we want to lose weight and we go on that crash diet, we do a starve diet. I have no idea what they are these days. You are going to be bound to go on a sugar craze or a carb craze down the road. It's better for us to do it incrementally and slowly change our lifestyle behaviors than to try and do it all at once. But the reality is, and this is really important, guys, the reality is we all have finite amounts of financial resources. And so a lot of the time we have that saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Well, we like to have our cake and we certainly want to eat it, but we do need to be able to make sacrifices, because the reality is that if we want to change our behavior, we're making sacrifices today for our benefit of our future selves. And if we decide not to sacrifice and make changes in our cash flow today, that's okay, but we're doing it at the sacrifice of our future selves. And so there's always a cause and effect in all of the decision making that we make, whether we know it or not. And it's making sure that we understand what our sacrifices are and are they reasonable and appropriate for each of us personally to be able to achieve the things that we want to do. So let's look at this budget a little bit. So on the next page, great. I've got my income, that $3,000 that's coming in. I've got my current expenses that I showed you earlier, but now I want to make some changes. I want to add in a savings component because there's a goal that I have and I want to make sure that I'm achieving it. And so I'm going to tweak a little bit. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to cut $50 off my groceries. Maybe I get the no-name brand instead of the top brand on some of those things that I buy. And maybe my discretionary can come down by about $200 a month. And that's going to give me the ability to save $250 per month. And so now we can create a budget. From there, you are going to have to find a way of tracking that budget, whether that's looking at your spending weekly, whether that's going back to that app and being honest with yourself. Are you adhering to this? Have you made those changes? This is our first step in what we do. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about, we've understood our cash flow. We've understood creating a budget, but how do we prioritize our goals? And this is a big one, because there's a lot of different goals that we can have. There's going to be short-term goals. There's going to be midterm goals. There's going to be long-term goals. And so we need to understand what they are, and you need to have a why as to why you're changing your cash flow and why you're changing your budgets. So understand, what are you trying to accomplish? Is there something you're trying to accomplish? If you're happy with how everything's going and everything is set, then why do you need to change? Then we want to understand, how much do we need? If we're trying to do this, is it because we want to pay something down? Is it because we want to save for something? So how much is it that we need to allocate, or what is it that we're trying to get to? Let's write down a number value. And when do we need it by? So what's our timeline? Now what we want to do is write down these goals, and we want to write down our priorities. And once we write them down, we can start itemizing them and giving ourselves an ability to achieve them. Couple of things that we need to think about, because a lot of the time when we write down our goals, it's generally things that are important to us. I want to go on a trip. I want to buy a house. I want to save for a wedding. Maybe I want to support my grandchildren because I'm getting up there and I want to make sure I've got money for them. But there's other things we also always have to factor in. And one of those is considering the unexpected. There are going to be expenses that come up, and we should be able to cover them with our savings and not necessarily rely on credit facilities. And then there's also the retirement aspect of things. If you're younger, we're focusing on all of these goals, but are we also focusing on our future self down the road? Okay, so let's give you an example here. I've got some goals, and I want to prioritize these goals. So I'm going to write down the goals that I have. Travel, house, wedding. Now I'm going to write down how much it's going to cost me, or how much I think it's going to cost me for all of these goals. So what do I need as a down payment? What is my trip going to cost? How much is my wedding going to cost? Because those aren't cheap these days. And then I'm going to write down my timeline. When is it that I want to achieve this? Well, I want to go to Europe in 2027, but I also want to buy a house in 2028. And the same year that I go to Europe, I also want to get married. So now I've prioritized, I've looked at the time. Okay, now let's break this down. Which one is more important? Well, buying a house to me is top priority. Then it's maybe traveling, but my number 2 isn't showing up. So I'm not sure. There we go. Number 3 is the wedding, because like, who actually needs a husband? He can just live in my house anyways once I've bought it, right? Then there's the short-term emergency funds. And it's important for me to address this before I go to how are we going to save and achieve those goals, because we forget this one. The rule of thumb is that we want 3 to 6 months worth of our income saved in a contingency fund. And when I say income, a lot of the people say, hey, I make $1,500 every 2 weeks. That means I make $3,000 a month. I need $9,000 saved in an emergency fund. In reality, what you need is what you spend per month. So if you only spend $1,500 per month and you're socking away $1,500, then 3 months of savings is about $4,500. We want to make sure that we save for this, because if we don't have short-term contingency funds, if you lose your job, you're hooped. You're probably using credit. If there's an unexpected health cost that comes up, you might be going back to work sooner than you anticipated. And for major expenses like a furnace goes, or there's a vet bill for your beloved cat or dog, we want to make sure that we can cover those without adding undue stress to you and relying on credit to get there. So understanding that this should always be a goal, and having a contingency fund is equally as important as us saving for that trip and that house as well as that wedding. All right. Then there's the long-term component of it. So long-term savings. Well, we've thought about all those midterm goals. We've talked about contingency. And the reality is at some point, you're going to want to retire. Now, I'm not going to make this presentation about the importance of long-term savings, because that's going to go on forever. But I am going to illustrate a couple of things that I think are really important for you to think about, because compounding effects are important and they do make an impact to your long-term savings. So just to make you think about it, I want you to think about saving $200 a month from 20 years old to 59 years old. So you've got 40 years. If your rate of return is 5%, now TFSA is what I'm using as an investment vehicle. maybe you use something else, your total contributions would be 96,000 over that 40 years. By the end of that 40 years, you have 306,000 saved. Why is this important? Why am I telling you this? Because a lot of the time we sacrifice our long-term goals to save for those midterm and short-term expenses, but there is a cost to it. So if I wait until I'm 30 years old and then I start saving and I do $200 a month at a 5% rate of return, now I've only contributed $72,000, but I only have $167,000 by the time I'm 59 years old. That is a dramatic difference from you starting at 20 than you starting at 30. And in order for you to get to where you would have been had you started saving at 20, if you start at 30, you have to put $370 a month towards that same retirement goal to get close to what you would have had you started at 20 at $200 a month. So you delaying that long-term goal is going to impact you in the fact that you have to save more to retire down the road. And so I want that out there because I think it's important that you recognize that when we make the goals around saving for short-term, saving for trips, we are sacrificing potentially a long-term objective, and there's a cost associated to that over time. So you can see them here in front of you. The total contributions that you have to put in the different scenarios, the end of year balances, your growth over time. If you prefer to use your money or you prefer it to work for you, either one is totally okay. It's just a cause and effect. Okay, so now that you've thought a bit about that long term, I've harped about the short term because I think it's excruciatingly important. Let's go to, well, now what? So we've got all these goals. Emergency fund, really important, buying a house, traveling. I've broken them down into my priority list. I've broken them down as to when. I've identified how many months I have to save within here. And then I've tallied it up. Well, if I need $9,000 over 12 months, that's $750 a month I need to save for an emergency fund. It's about $700 a month I need to save for my house. And I add all of that up. My total savings that I need to put aside is $2,500 per month to achieve all of my goals. Is this realistic? Absolutely not, because I'm only making $3,000 a month. And so the reality is we're not likely going to be able to achieve everything that we want. In fact, if you remember my budget from earlier on, I can only allocate $250 per month based on what I have the capacity to do right now. So now I'm feeling pretty defeated. You don't need to. There's solutions for this. Here's our solutions. We extend our goal date. Instead of 2028 for that house, how about I buy it in 2030 or maybe 2035? Or maybe I reduce the goal amount. Could I buy a smaller house? Could I spend a little bit less on my wedding? Could I find an alternate income stream to help increase my savings capacity? Maybe I decide I'm going to do a part-time job and throw that aside towards my goals because I really want to nail them within a short period of time. That's the only way I'm going to do it. Or can you go back to your budget and reduce your expenses somewhere else to increase your savings capacity? Sometimes it makes us really uncomfortable in different areas, but it's a sacrifice we've chosen to make to be able to achieve these goals. And if we opt to do none of them, if we opt to do nothing other than the $250 a month towards savings, then essentially what you've said is your current lifestyle is what you want to focus on. And that's totally okay. But it's also at the expense of these future goals. And so you've essentially said, hey, look, I'm going to get there when I get there with $250 a month. That's it. Not a priority. I'm just going to live in the current moment. And that's fine too. But if you opt to adjust to a reasonable and achievable strategy, now you're balancing your needs of today with the future opportunities that you want for tomorrow. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about credit, because the reality is credit plays a big role. And all of this so far makes the assumption that you have no debt and we're just dealing with your current monthly expenditures. And the reality is that most of us have some form of financial stress result from a shortage in cash flow. And a lot of that is due to potentially credit card debt or student loans that we have. So how do we manage that so that we can feel like that's manageable and we can look at saving for long term? Let's begin to shake off some of this stress as we talk about a few strategies you can use to help navigate the topic of debt. And an important question that many have is how to begin paying down your debt. And the first thing that we want to look at is a couple of rules of thumb. So the reality is a lot of us have credit cards, and the sooner we learn this, the more important, the better you're going to be off. Credit cards are used when you can pay them off within a 1 to 3 month period. And if you're asking me as a financial planner, I'm going to tell you that if you are going to spend on a credit card, you should be paying it off by the time that it is due. If you pay it off by the due date, you never owe the bank a penny. You don't pay us 20% interest. That is absolutely ludicrous to pay to anybody for borrowing money. But if you have to use a credit card and you have to carry a debt on it, that credit card should be able to be paid off within a 1 to 3 month period. If you don't, just multiply what it is that you have outstanding by 20% and look at that number, because that's how much you're paying the bank. A line of credit is a different credit product that's revolving, where you can borrow off of it and put back onto it over a period of time. It generally has a reduced interest rate compared to a credit card, and it should be used if you're going to carry that debt for a little bit longer. So if it's 3 to 12 months that you're going to pay it off, use a line of credit. And if you don't think you're going to be able to pay it off within a 1 month or a 1 year period, consider a loan. And when considering a loan, you can think about consolidating high interest debt into a more cost-effective low interest option. And so, for example, you can go into the bank and ask for a consolidation loan, which essentially we bundle all of your credit card and other high interest debt together. We give you one loan, we amortize it out over a period of time. Maybe you pay it off in 3 years, maybe you pay it off in 5 years. But you've got more going towards principal, you have less going towards interest, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if we're going to do this, this is another budget item that's on your monthly expenses, and we want to make sure that going forward you're not accumulating more debt. And so it's really important that if we're going to go with a consolidation loan, you have to marry that with an emergency fund. You have to build a contingency fund in so that when those big ticket expenses come up, you can use that instead of using your credit card. Okay, I'm sure I'm going to have questions on this, and so I'm going to leave them for the end so that we can talk about it more. But another question that comes up is, should I pay down my debt or should I save money? Danica, you've been telling me that I need to save money, save for these goals, save long-term, save for emergency savings, but I have all this looming debt over here. What should I be doing? And the answer at the end of the day comes back to, it depends. It depends on your comfortability with debt. It depends on the stress load that you have from that debt. Is that debt causing you emotional harm, or are you okay with it? Then the further question is what is the interest rate that I'm paying on that debt? Are you paying 20% interest, but you're only going to get a 5% yield on your savings? Well, you're earning less than you're paying, so it's better to pay it off. Did you consolidate it to a loan that now you're only paying 4.9% in interest, but you're earning 6% in your investment and you're okay with it? It's not stressing you out anymore. You've got a timeline. You know it's going to get paid off. Well, then it makes more sense for us to pay it off on that loan and invest in our savings as well. We want to make sure it's costing you less than those returns are making you in order to justify savings. But it's also around making sure that you're utilizing that debt in a way that is benefiting you rather than making your finances more difficult. Okay. Again, I think we're going to have questions on this at the end, so I'm leaving a lot of room there for us. And the last piece that I want to talk about, and this really is just a slide about paying your future self. So understand that paying yourself first is a really, really important concept when we think about financial freedom. When you prioritize your savings, you're not just building towards your goals, you're investing in your future self. It's about making sure that this is a non-negotiable expense. A lot of time, if we are finding financial constraint, the first thing that goes is savings to ourselves. And most of the time, when I've come into situations where I'm helping clients navigate a debt situation, when I say you've got to save money, they say, I can't. I can't do it, Danica. But if we don't do it, if we don't put aside money, I guarantee you that you are going to be using that debt load again. You're going to be racking up the credit card or the loan, and therefore you're never going to feel like you're getting ahead. So it is so critically important that we make this a non-negotiable line item and we adjust other areas to make sure we can set you up for success in the long term. You take anything from this presentation, making sure you have a short-term contingency fund is one of the most valuable things you can do to set yourself up in a good position in the long term. Okay. Key takeaways. Going back to the beginning, understand how you spend your money. Spend time going through your cash flow. Give yourself a bottle of wine, a piece of paper, and some time to go through it so that you understand where your money is going. Once you understand where it's going, make small incremental changes that are reasonable and appropriate for you so that you can navigate your budget and start building in different areas. Understand your goals, write them down, make them achievable, give you reasonable, appropriate timelines that you can do, and make sure you're thinking about your short, mid, and long term. Think about your credit. If that is a sore spot, if that is a stressor, make an appointment with the bank, have a conversation. Is there a way of making these payments easier for you? And then again, setting up a systematic savings to come out of your banking account, just like your car loan, to pay yourself first is a really good way to establish and achieve those goals. That's in your number 3. Okay, 7:36. I've left 24 minutes for questions because I think that this is an area that we want to go. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you guys so much for paying attention to me in my soapbox rant about budgeting and savings. Do we have any questions, Tracy?
Well, not just yet, but thank you for that, Danique. I think that's a lot of information for people to take away. So definitely everybody start sharing your questions, as I said, in either the chat or the Q&A function. I'm going to start with the question, Danique, while we wait for them to come through. And I might be taking somebody's thunder by asking this question, but I know we always get it in pretty much every financial webinar we have is, can you please explain what a TFSA is and why it's a common tool that people use for saving?
Yeah, great. So TFSA stands for tax-free savings account. Now, I use this as an example in that compounding because I didn't want to go into the nitty-gritty between an RSP, so a registered retirement savings plan, a tax-free savings account, and a non-registered investment account. But it's important to understand all three of them to understand what a tax-free savings account is and what it isn't. A tax-free savings account is like a kitchen cupboard. So call your cupboard the tax-free savings account and you open it up, and inside there you've got a myriad of different shelves. And so the bottom shelf is a savings account, just like your day-to-day savings that you have that you can open up with the bank. But more importantly, your next shelf is maybe GICs, and the next shelf is mutual funds where we can invest your money. And you can actually even hold stocks inside your TFSA. The benefit of a tax-free savings account is that if you put money in there and you make money on that money, so if you put in $1,000 and it grows to $1,500, that $500 that you just made in returns, you never pay income tax on it. It is an incredibly beautiful vehicle if it is used reasonably and appropriately. Reasonable and appropriate. These are my words for today. It is really truly designed as a long-term savings vehicle. It is not designed for saving for the short term. It's not your emergency contingency fund. It should be used as a compounding effect. It supplements or complements a retirement savings plan because of the fact that it can grow. And this is the only vehicle in Canada that you don't pay taxes on ever on that growth. Did I answer that? Yeah.
Yes, you did. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. So in that time, we've had a few questions that have come through now. So I'm just going to start from the first one to the fifth one that we've received so far. So the first one is, do you provide financial advice for retirement? So I think that's a general question, but I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to mention that's specific to planning for retirement in a few minutes or less.
Yeah, I do provide specific advice for retirement. I think your lights went off, Tracy.
It did it because there's a cleaning person here. So keep talking, and I'm just
Yeah.
going to turn them on.
Yeah. Uh, my joy in life is providing advice around retirement income planning, and that looks like a different thing depending on where you are in retirement. So if we're coming up to retirement, it's making sure that we've got the right amount of money saved in order to achieve the retirement that you want. And then once you're in retirement, or just prior to retirement, it's looking at, how do we draw your income from those different vehicles: CPP, old age security, RSPs, which turn into RIFs, pension plans. How do we make sure it's tax efficient? How do we make sure we're taking it out? And then as you go through retirement, those planning components don't stop. Another portion of retirement planning is the eventual need to estate plan, and making sure that we've got the right strategies in place to pass on your wealth. And when we pass on that wealth, making sure that we don't have large tax liabilities or other pitfalls that we haven't thought about that might impact that. So very long-winded question to, yes, I do work on retirement planning. That is my bread and butter. That is what I love to do, retirement and estate planning. And so if that is something that you want to chat a bit about, search me on LinkedIn, search me on, Google me, and you can certainly reach out and we can have a conversation.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Okay, second question. Do you think we should do a zero-based budgeting monthly?
Yeah, great. So it really depends on you. How analytical are you, and how much effort do you want to put in? So some people, it is sufficient enough to go through this activity once, and you're good. You straighten out your behaviors, you create your budget, you're achieving your goals. Fantastic. Some people need to do this more frequently so that they keep getting the aha moment of what we're spending. So it really depends on you. At the end of the day, this is a tool for you to be able to achieve what you want, whether that's reducing your spending, increasing your savings, those kind of things. So I will go through periods myself where I'll do a $0 budget period for a couple of months because I feel like my spending has gone a little bit haywire. And then I've reeled it back in, and now I'm feeling pretty confident and I'm not going to touch it for a couple more months. So, go with, are you achieving what you want? And if you are, great. And if you aren't, well, maybe go and do it a couple more times.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, next question. My paychecks go to bills, hydro, phone, internet, etc. Is there a way to get these monthly payments decreased?
Yep. Go ahead.
Nope. I'm just thinking like there's going to the individual organizations themselves, but from a financial point of view, I don't know any advice you can provide there.
Yeah, I mean, negotiation is something that we can all do. So when we think about our cell phones, that one's a pretty easy one to negotiate. A lot of the time, when you jump from one provider to another, which is really easy these days, a lot of the time you can get a reduced rate on there. So it requires effort and work for you to go through and have those conversations. There's certain things that we can't negotiate down, like hydro, you're not going to negotiate down, but you could you go on the budget so it's the same every month and easier to plan. A lot of those things that were like really reflecting on what matters most to you, and can you make lifestyle changes to reduce those. So if you're finding that these are too expensive, sometimes we have to ask the hard question: would it make sense for us to change where we're living and reduce those costs? Could we bring somebody else in short term and help cover those costs? Can I rent out a room? Those kind of conversations might be a more creative way to reduce those expenses than actually going and trying to connect with everybody to reduce them.
Or remove that landline that many people have already, right? And just have your cell phone.
Yeah.
For
Or your subscriptions. How many subscriptions do
Yeah,
you have? When was the
that's true
last time
too.
you went through your credit card? Like my husband the other day, he was so proud of himself. He says, "Oh, I saved us money." I said, "What did you do, honey?" He goes, "Oh, I got us a Disney subscription for $2.99 a month." I said, "But we didn't have Disney, and it's going to go up in like 3 months." So like this was
It
not a
does.
good thing.
Great.
Uh, so no, cancel it.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. What are the best ways to save for our emergency fund rather than make them sit in the bank?
Yeah, great question. Okay. So I get this all the time. And I get this a lot with my retirees too, in that they'll have a balance sitting in the bank account and they say, hey, Danica, I need it to make money. Do some math because interest rates for short-term money isn't fantastic. You're not going to make a boatload. And emergency money is designed to be quick. It's designed to be accessible. It's designed to be secure. And so when we think about secure, the word secure, I'm thinking cash, I'm thinking savings accounts, maybe money markets. GICs are locked up most of the time, so that's not accessible and easy. If we look at short-term savings vehicles, you're likely only going to get between a 1% to 2% interest rate on them. And so is it worth your effort versus just having it in an everyday savings? If I go $1,000 times 2%, that's $20 a year. Does it make sense for me to move it over for $20 a year? Or is it okay to sit in my bank account? But if our emergency savings is starting to build, things like what's something called an investment savings account, which we can hold in non-registered investment vehicles, they can pay 1.8%. So that's okay. It's not quite inflation, but it's better than zero in your bank account. That would be somewhere I would put it. I would not invest an emergency contingency fund in the market, because if the markets tank, guess what? And you had something come up, crap, you thought you had $8,000. Now you actually only have $6,000 because it fell, and you can't fix that roof that you needed to fix. So emergency savings, the design is to be safe and secure, and then leave the markets for your long-term investments.
Okay, great. Speaking of investment tools, next question is, what are your thoughts on GICs as an investment vehicle?
Great. So there is so many thoughts on GICs, and it certainly, the answer is it depends. There's layers here. So there's the risk capacity. Can you stomach your money moving? If the answer is no, maybe a GIC is right for you. There's traditional GICs, and then there's unique GICs that are market linked. The challenge with a GIC is GICs will never beat inflation. So if you think about, a couple of years ago, interest rates, post-pandemic crept up quite high. GICs were at 4.55%. At the same time, inflation was running at 8%. Now, if you locked in for 5 years, fast forward, you still got that GIC. It's at a pretty solid rate, and inflation has come down to about 2.5, 2.9%. So we're feeling pretty good about that. But generally speaking, when you buy a GIC in the year that you buy it in, the rate of return is going to be less than inflation. And so if GICs are our only savings vehicle, and we're not using any non-traditional GICs, you're eroding your purchasing power, which ultimately means if you locked in $10,000 today, what you could buy with that $10,000 when the GIC comes up, you're not going to be able to buy it anymore. You're going to have to kick money out of your bank account to cover it. So my rule of thumb first is, do you have the stomach for risk? If the answer is no, we just forgo that concept, and we understand that there's an erosion of purchasing power, and we go with GICs. If you can stomach even a little bit of fluctuations, then you use GICs for those things that you're going to want to spend in 1 to 3 years. So, if I think about a retiree, for example, cash flow that I'm going to use in the next 3 years, I'm generally going to keep in GICs. But anything beyond that, I'm probably using a bond portfolio or an equity portfolio so that I can feel the market movements. I've still got security short term to provide us income streams, but I'm going to beat inflation over time. So they definitely play a role in a portfolio. How much of a role depends on what life stage you are in, what risk capacity you can tolerate.
Okay, great. Now, the next two questions are about home ownership / mortgages. First one speaks to about a specific situation where this person makes about $40,000 a year. His wife had passed and left with enough money to pay off his mortgage, but $140,000 left. So it's pretty low at $300 a month. The question is, should I pay it off instead of investing my money? And what are the benefits in paying off my mortgage? I think that this person's concerned in terms of the stress that it may cause having a mortgage still looming.
Yeah, first and foremost, my deepest condolences to the loss of your spouse. That's pretty tough, and a tough reason to receive $140,000. This is another one of it depends question. So, if the $300 a month for your mortgage payment is affordable for you, so if it's not hurting your cash flow and you're able to do all of the things that you want to do, and your interest rate is relatively low, let's say, for example, it's a 4.5%, what is the return you're going to get on that 140 if you opted to invest it? Is that return going to be greater than the cost on that mortgage? And if that return is going to be greater, we might consider investing it versus paying off the mortgage. If it's not, we might consider paying off the mortgage. But a big part of it is cash flow. How are you going to cash flow, and where are you going to redirect that money to if you don't have that mortgage? Is that going to allow you a better lifestyle? Could you potentially save that? Where within your life cycle are you? Are you retired right now? Are you working right now? And so generally, when I'm going to provide advice for a client around, do we pay off the mortgage or do we invest that money? I'm going to look to their financial plan. So hopefully we've created a plan for you. And then we're going to run the scenarios out and look at, does it make more sense long-term for us to do one or the other? So this is an area where I would actually encourage you to connect with your financial planner to have this conversation, or with a financial planner to have this conversation so that you're making the decision that's right for you.
Okay, thanks. For the next question, which I'm sure you're probably going to cover in our next Tuesdays with TD webinar, which is at the end of February in home ownership. But let's talk about this right now, which is the questions. Please explain the first home savings account. And would you recommend taking advantage of it to save for a house rather than a regular savings account?
Oh yeah, hands down. Like not even a blink. This is something you should be using. So first home savings account, again, they kind of make a misnomer when they name it. CRA does a really good job at that. When we think about the word savings account in something, our brain automatically correlates it to our everyday savings account. And we don't necessarily see the same value that actually is presented in that in and of itself. So a first home savings account, the hugest value, it's actually more of a comparison to an RSP, a retirement savings plan, than it is a bank account. And so I'm just going to rewind and give you a little bit of history here. So an RSP, many years ago, they said, hey, look, we recognize that home affordability is a problem and people have saved for retirement. So we're going to allow you to take money out of your RSP and use that towards a down payment on your house. But you have to pay it back within a 15-year period once you take it out. And so when we put money into our RSP, we automatically get a tax refund. So if you're making $60,000 a year and you put $5,000 into your RSP, you get a tax refund. And ultimately CRA says, hey, you made $55,000. We're going to kick you back that refund. Now, when you take that money out for your home ownership, well, you've already gotten the refund from the RSP. And so when you put it back over the 15 years, you're not getting any benefit other than repaying it. So you don't have to pay the taxes. First home savings account, what that does, says, hey, you can put up to $8,000 into a first home savings account per year. Your limit only starts as soon as you open the account. So it's not like, okay, you turned 18 and now you're accumulating room. It's, hey, I open the account, now I accumulate room going forward. But if you put that 8,000 in, it's going to reduce your income by 8,000, much like your RSP does, which is super awesome. But you don't have to repay it back. So, you take it out when you buy the house, you don't have to repay it back. Now you can actually use your RSP to save for retirement and get a tax benefit in the future years. So that's the first benefit that you don't get in your bank account. The second benefit for a first home savings is that you can invest within that account. So you could keep it in cash or you could put it into the markets if you're going to be saving for a couple of years and see some market movement and see some growth. And then that growth can be used for your house purchase down the road. There's some caveats in there around how long you can invest within a first-time home buyers. And then if you don't end up using it, what you can do with it, like shuffling it over to an RSP. So there's some nuances that you want to be very aware of before you use it, but it is certainly a huge advantage. And if you were saving for a house, I would go with that first before I went with anything else.
Okay, great advice. Okay, sticking with investment tools, we're going to talk TFSAs again.
Okay.
Would you recommend maximizing your TFSA before maximizing your RRSPs?
Man, you guys, these are all it depends conversations.
Yes.
It depends. So Where the big depends is what is your income now, and what do we think your income is going to be in the future while you're working, and then what do we think your income is going to be in retirement, because there's kind of like three pillars that we have to look at. If you're early on in your career and you make less than $35,000, let's say you're a student, you're doing some part-time work, and now you're accumulating some RSP room, you're at the lowest marginal tax rate, so you're at a 25% tax rate. If you put money into your RSP, you're going to get a 25% refund. So if you put in $1,000, you're going to get 250 back, provided that you've had appropriate taxes taken off at source from your pay stub. But the idea behind an RSP is tax deferral to lower income earning years. So what does that mean? Well, we put it in and we got a tax refund of $250 today, and then we take it out in retirement, ideally at a lower tax bracket, but you're in the lowest marginal tax bracket. So you're going to take that money out later on and you're still going to pay $250 on the $1,000 you take out. So was it the biggest bang for your buck? Maybe if you took that 250 refund that you got and you reinvested it back into an RSP to compound a refund over a refund, now we're talking like complex strategy that nobody ever does, because they like their refund to spend on, that trip once per year. But if you were going to do that, maybe there's an argument there. But generally speaking, you want to be not in the lowest tax bracket. You want to be in a bit of a higher tax bracket when we start contributing to the RSP. And then when we take it out in the future, in an ideal world, you're in a lower tax bracket. And so when we think RSP versus TFSA, we first look to your income. We second look to your time horizon. We third look at your full plan projection and what we're going to be at down the road. And then do we have contingencies or buffers in there as well? If we're only saving for retirement, but we've got no other cash to draw from, we might want to save in a TFSA, even though the refund would be better in the RSP, because if something happens, you've got nowhere to draw from other than the RSP. We might start with that TFSA and then shift it over to the RSP afterwards. So the large answer is it depends. It would warrant a conversation between us to determine what would be the most sense, but it's really unique to everybody's financial picture as to which one is going to be the best and when. I know that doesn't answer your question. Like, there's so much, it's not even great. It's just that it depends based on who you are, what your current circumstances are. Not everything is the same and the right approach for everybody.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about debt. First question is, do bankruptcies stay on a person's credit report 7 years from the date the bankruptcy was filed? Or is it the 7 years from the date the person has been discharged from the bankruptcy?
Well, that's a great question. So I haven't dealt with credit facilities for many years because I work on the wealth and the financial planning aspect of it. If memory serves me correctly, and I'm drawing from a long time ago, I'm pretty certain it's from the date of discharge. Now, that's not to say that you can't apply for credit, and it's not to say that you can't start building your credit once you've had a bankruptcy. It's just that it's harder. And so a lot of the time, things like Capital One will give you a credit card even though you've had a bankruptcy on file, but your bigger organizations would be less inclined to, because there's a risk there and they want to see that you can establish and maintain credit over a period of time before they're going to lend it to you. So I don't know that my answer is 100% correct. I do think it's after discharge, but if that's a conversation and it's really about your credit bureau, I would suggest talking about how do you reestablish that credit even though the bankruptcy is still there.
Okay. Okay, great. Next question is, I use credit cards to pay variable expenses, but find it hard to ensure I'm sticking to my budget. Any suggestions?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of us experience this. It's easy to swipe our card. And it's easy to swipe our card and then, on the weekend, go and look at it afterwards and be like, oh, Dinah, like I spent way more than I thought I did by the time that everything posts on Monday. If you're struggling, I would suggest reviewing. Like, the best thing you can become acquainted to is your app that your credit card is with. So, if it's with a TD, log in and check what you're spending. And if you're not sticking to your budget, check it daily. If you're, daily is okay, check it weekly. If you're having a hard time, then what I would recommend that you do is have the money in your bank account, use your credit card, and then at the end of the week or even at the end of the day, sometimes just pay off what you spent on there, right? There's value in using a credit card for variable expenses. Most of the time, there's going to be insurances on there that aren't as part of your bank account. There's, if there's something that didn't go through properly using your credit card, you can put in a claim to get that money back from the merchant. Like, there's a ton of value there. But if you're finding it hard to hit those budgets, then I would say, hey, use almost like a cash discipline. Keep the money in the bank account for what you think you're going to spend, pay it off daily. And that way, then oh man, I'm getting pretty close to that. I've got to pinch up for the next couple of days before my next paycheck comes in.
I knew someone who used to every week, every Friday, she would religiously go to the bank to pay off her credit card so she never had any debt. I'm like, wow, that was commitment. And I don't know if she still does that, but I was quite impressed with that.
Yeah, don't go to the bank anymore. Long
Yeah,
lineups, differential people. You don't want to go in there. Use your
yeah,
app, check it on there, but
right,
you can easily transfer it weekly to
right.
pay that off. Yeah.
Great. Okay, before I read the last question, just last chance for if anybody has any questions. Again, either the chat or the Q&A. This has been great. Thank you for all the questions. Okay, so next question is on, do you have a recommendation for an approximate amount for a contingency savings?
Yeah, so that goes back to your cash flow. So look at your bank account. Okay, so look at what money flows into your bank account per month. Look at what money flows out per month, excluding savings. So let's go back to that budget conversation that we had earlier. If you have $3,000 a month coming into your bank account every month, and every single penny is spent, but there's none going towards savings, take that number that's coming in, multiply it by 3, start there. So 3,000 times 3, that's 9,000. Now, if you're saving part of your paycheck, so if you've got 3,000 coming in, but you're really diligent and you're putting $1,000 a month towards your savings, you actually are only spending $2,000 on your lifestyle. That's what we're trying to protect. When we think about emergency contingency fund, a lot of the time what we're thinking about is, if you lost your job, how long could you manage before you started to go into debt and were panicky? And so generally we want 3 to 6 months. Start with 3. If you're really conservative, go up to 6. I'm a 6 kind of girl. But you take that number of what you need to manage your life without going into debt. So if it's 2,000, multiply that by 3, that's $6,000. That's where you start. That's the kind of general rule. If you're a homeowner, the reality is that there are always going to be repairs in your house. And my rule of thumb, if you're a homeowner, is that you need $5,000 per year for large capital expenditures. And you might say, well, I don't spend $5,000 a year. No, you might not. But 3 years from now, you're going to spend $15,000 on something, right? If you have a roof repair, a furnace, a hot water tank, if there's a foundation issue, those are big ticket items that really quickly get away from you. And so generally home ownership, $5,000 per year minimum goes towards a vehicle that is just for home repairs in the future. Now, if you don't have home repairs for 5 years and you've got 25,000 in there, pat yourself on the back. You can stop saving 5,000 per year for a while. But if you've got a house, that's what I would suggest.
Great advice. Or a window or a door even. They're expensive too. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, and seeing that it's 8:03, I think we're going to conclude questions right now. So thank you, everybody, for those great questions. That made my job far easier. Lots of diversity as well in those questions. Thank you also, Danica, for that really informative presentation. As I said, we've often pretty much annually, we do a balancing spending and savings session, and we always get such an array of questions. But I know I find for myself, I always learn something new that I can apply to my own personal financial situation. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So very soon, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be sending you an email, which will have a link to the YouTube channel that you will be able to see this presentation again and again and again, and you can share with friends and family. I highly encourage you to do that. Again, thanks to Danica, as well as to our UM Affinity partner, TD Insurance, for the generous sponsorship of this webinar. We do have two more Tuesdays with TD financial series as part of this year. The next one is, as I mentioned earlier, February 24th is on home ownership and if it's right for you in your financial situation. That's the last Tuesday in February. And then also March 24th, which is starting and growing your small business. So you won't want to miss either of those. Danica will be here for both of those, but she's also bringing colleagues of hers who are experts in this area. So again, free advice. We really encourage you to come to both of those sessions if those topics interest you, or share with others who may find them interesting. So those of you who are alumni, keep reading your monthly alumni e-news. Have you heard? Visit our website to stay tuned for what's going on and how you can register for these future sessions. Staff, faculty, and students, if you're there, keep looking at your Week at a Glance and Student Weekly for registration information here. Thanks again for joining us and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.
Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks again.